Jake Thompson was a hardworking guy in his mid-20s. He worked long hours at a gas station on the edge of town, trying to make ends meet for his family. His paycheck wasn't much, but Jake always tried to stay positive. He believed in doing the right thing even when it was tough. One cold winter evening, as Jake cleaned the pumps outside, an old man pulled into the station. The car looked old and worn, its paint faded from years of use. Jake greeted him with a smile. "Evening, sir. How can I help you?" The elderly man nodded politely. "I just need to fill up the tank, son." Jake waved him toward the pump and went back inside to wait. A few minutes later, the man shuffled into the store, looking worried. In his hand, he held a handful of crumpled bills and loose change. I'm sorry," the man said hesitantly. "I don't have enough for the full tank. Can I pay for half?" Jake glanced at the register, 32.54 fuel. The man had barely 15. He could see the frustration in the man's eyes and knew how hard it must be to ask for help. "Don't worry about it," Jake said quickly. "I'll cover the rest." Before the man could protest, Jake grabbed his last $20 from his wallet and finished the transaction. "It's okay," Jake assured him, handing back the man's money. "Everyone needs a little help sometimes." The elderly man looked relieved and deeply grateful. "Thank you, young man. You didn't have to do that." "It's no big deal," Jake replied with a small smile. But moments after the man drove away, Jake's manager stormed out of the office. "What was that?" the manager demanded angrily. "You used your own money to pay for a customer's fuel? That's against company rules." Jake tried to explain. "He didn't have enough and I couldn't let him leave without gas. It was only $20. "I don't care if it was 2 cents, the manager snapped. "You broke protocol. You're fired, effective immediately." Jake felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. He'd only been trying to help, but now he was out of a job. As he walked to his car, clutching his belongings in a cardboard box, he wondered if doing the right thing was worth losing everything. What Jake didn't know was that the elderly man wasn't just any stranger, and his simple act of kindness was about to change both their lives forever. Jake sat in his car, staring at the gas station sign glowing faintly under the streetlights. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on him like a heavy blanket. Fired for helping someone. It didn't make sense. How could doing the right thing cost him so much? He thought about driving home but couldn't face telling his wife, Sarah, and their 5-year-old daughter, Lily. What would he say? That he'd lost his job because he gave away $20? They were already struggling to pay rent and buy groceries. Now things would only get worse. Finally, Jake forced himself to start the engine and head home. When he walked through the door, Sarah was in the kitchen, wiping down the counter. She turned to greet him with a smile that quickly faded when she saw his face. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. I got fired," Jake admitted quietly, setting the cardboard box on the table. Sarah froze, her eyes wide. "What? Why?" Jake hesitated, unsure how to explain without sounding foolish. "I paid for a customer's gas with my own money. He didn't have enough and I didn't think it would matter. But my manager found out, and..." He trailed off, unable to finish. Sarah stared at him for a moment before pulling him into a tight hug. "You did the right thing," she said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. "Even if it costs us, I'm proud of you." Her words brought some comfort, but they didn't solve the problem. Over the next few days, Jake applied for jobs everywhere. Fast food restaurants, warehouses, retail stores, but rejection emails piled up faster than he could send out applications. Each one felt like another nail in the coffin of hope. Money grew tighter by the day. Rent was due soon, and their pantry was nearly empty. One evening, as Jake scrolled through job listings on his phone, Lily tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, can we get pizza tonight?" she asked innocently. Jake forced a smile, his heart breaking. "Not tonight, sweetheart. Maybe tomorrow, okay?" Lily nodded, oblivious to the storm brewing around her. Watching her walk away, Jake felt a surge of guilt. Was losing his job worth it? Had his kindness really made a difference, or had it only hurt his family? To make matters worse, word spread around town about what happened. Some people praised Jake for his selflessness, calling him a hero. Others criticized him, saying he should have followed the rules no matter what. "Why does everyone feel the need to judge me?" Jake muttered during a rare moment alone. His best friend, Marcus, stopped by later that week with a six-pack of beer and a listening ear. "You're too hard on yourself," Marcus said as they sat on the porch. "You did something most people wouldn't dare to do. You put someone else's needs ahead of your own. That takes guts." "But look where it got me," Jake replied bitterly. "No job, no money, no future." Marcus sighed, clapping a hand on Jake's shoulder. "It's not over yet. Something good will come from this. I know it." Despite his friend's encouragement, Jake struggled to believe things would turn around. Every morning, he forced himself out of bed, determined to keep trying. But hope felt like a distant memory. Then, one afternoon, as Jake filled out yet another job application at the library, he noticed an elderly man sitting nearby. At first glance, the man looked familiar, but Jake couldn't place him. As the man approached, Jake realized it was the same elderly driver he'd helped at the gas station. "Jake?" the man asked gently. "Do you remember me?" Jake blinked, stunned. "Yes, sir. Of course." The man smiled warmly. "I owe you an apology and an explanation." Confused but curious, Jake listened as the man introduced himself properly. "My name is Mr. Grayson," he began, "and I want to thank you for everything." Over the next few weeks, Jake's life spiraled into a blur of stress and uncertainty. Without a steady income, every small expense felt like a crisis. Rent was overdue, utilities were on the verge of being shut off, and meals became simpler. Ramen noodles one night, peanut butter sandwiches the next. Sarah tried to stay positive, but Jake could see the worry etched on her face. "Maybe I should have just followed the rules," Jake muttered one evening as they sat together at the kitchen table. "If I hadn't paid for that gas, we wouldn't be in this mess." Sarah shook her head firmly. "No, Jake. You helped someone because it was the right thing to do. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. Not even yourself." Her words were meant to comfort him, but Jake still couldn't shake the guilt. What if his family suffered because of his decision? Was kindness really worth it when it came at such a high price? Things got worse before they got better. One morning, Jake received a notice from their landlord, a final warning about late rent. That same day, Lily came home crying because her classmates teased her for wearing old clothes. It broke Jake's heart to see his little girl embarrassed over something she couldn't control. "I'll fix this," Jake promised her, pulling her into a hug. "I promise." But deep down he wasn't sure how or if he could keep that promise. Amid the struggles, there were moments of unexpected kindness that reminded Jake why helping others mattered. A neighbor dropped off a bag of groceries, saying, "I know times are tough. Let me help." A stranger at the coffee shop paid for his drink when Jake hesitated at the counter, short on cash. These gestures weren't grand, but they carried weight. They reminded Jake that goodness still existed in the world. Still, doubt lingered. Would his act of kindness ever truly pay off? Or had he made a mistake by putting someone else's needs ahead of his own? One afternoon, while walking through town, Jake spotted Mr. Grayson again, the elderly man he'd helped at the gas station. This time, the man waved him over with a warm smile. "Jake, I'm glad I found you," Mr. Grayson said, his tone sincere. "I've been meaning to talk to you." Jake hesitated, unsure what to expect. "About what?" "About what happened after you helped me," Mr. Grayson explained. "I heard you lost your job because of me, or rather, because of us, and I can't stand by and do nothing." Jake frowned, confused. "It's not your fault. I made the choice to help you. I don't regret that." Mr. Grayson studied him for a moment, admiration flickering in his eyes. "Even so, I can't ignore the impact it had on you. Please, let me repay you for everything." Jake shook his head instinctively. Accepting money from a near stranger felt wrong, especially under these circumstances. Yet part of him wondered if refusing Mr. Grayson's offer would only prove that kindness went unrewarded. Before Jake could respond, Mr. Grayson handed him a business card. "Think about it. I'll be in touch soon." As Mr. Grayson walked away, Jake stared at the card in his hand. It bore the name Edward Grayson and a phone number, but no indication of who the man really was or what he intended to do next. For the first time in weeks, Jake felt a spark of curiosity and perhaps a glimmer of hope. A few days later, Jake mustered the courage to call the number on the business card. Mr. Grayson answered almost immediately, his voice warm and inviting. "Jake, I'm glad you called," he said. "Can we meet tomorrow morning? There's something important I need to discuss with you." Jake hesitated but agreed. He needed answers, and maybe, just maybe, a little help wouldn't hurt. The next morning, they met at a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. Mr. Grayson arrived dressed in a sharp suit, looking far more polished than the frail man Jake had encountered at the gas station. As they sat down, Jake couldn't help but notice the respect the waitstaff showed Mr. Grayson, as if he were someone important. "You seem different today," Jake observed cautiously. Mr. Grayson chuckled softly. "Ah, yes, the last time we met, I wasn't exactly dressed for success. But that's a story for another time." Jake nodded, unsure where this was going. "So, what did you want to talk about?" Mr. Grayson leaned forward, his expression serious yet kind. "First, let me apologize again for what happened after our encounter. If I'd known my visit would cost you your job, I never would have let you pay for my fuel." "It wasn't your fault," Jake replied quickly. "I made the choice to help you. I don't regret it." "I know," Mr. Grayson said, nodding. "And that's why I'm here, to repay your kindness. Not because I feel guilty, but because I want to honor the selflessness you showed me." Jake frowned, suspicion creeping in. "What do you mean by repay?" Instead of answering directly, Mr. Grayson began sharing bits of his own story. He explained that he was once a successful businessman who had retired years ago to focus on giving back to the community. Over time, however, he grew disillusioned with people's greed and selfishness. "That day at the gas station," he continued, "you reminded me of what humanity should be. Your act of kindness, it wasn't calculated or self-serving. It was pure. And it made me realize I haven't been doing enough to inspire others." Jake listened intently, his heart softening. This wasn't the same weary man he'd helped fill up his tank. This was someone wise, thoughtful, and clearly passionate about making a difference. "So here's what I propose," Mr. Grayson said firmly. "Let me help you get back on your feet. Pay your rent, cover your bills, whatever you need. No strings attached." Jake's eyes widened in disbelief. I can't accept that. It's too much." "It's not charity," Mr. Grayson countered gently. "Think of it as an investment in someone who deserves it. Someone who reminded me why kindness matters." Jake shook his head, struggling to process his words. Accepting money from anyone felt wrong, let alone a near stranger. Yet, part of him wondered if refusing Mr. Grayson's offer would only prove that kindness truly went unrewarded. "What do you want from me in return?" Jake asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing," Mr. Grayson replied without hesitation. "Except one thing, keep being you. Keep helping others even when it's hard. Because the world needs more people like you, Jake." Tears welled up in Jake's eyes as his words sank in. For weeks, he doubted whether his decision to help Mr. Grayson had been worth it. Now, here was someone telling him it was not just worth it but necessary. "Okay," Jake whispered, nodding slowly. "Thank you." Mr. Grayson smiled, relief washing over his face. "You won't regret this, Jake. Together, we'll make sure your kindness inspires others." As they parted ways, Jake felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He still didn't know exactly what Mr. Grayson planned to do, but for the first time since losing his job, he allowed himself to hope. Little did he know, his life was about to change in ways he never imagined. Over the next few days, Mr. Grayson wasted no time making good on his promise. Jake received a bank transfer that covered his overdue rent, utility bills, and even a small buffer for groceries. Alongside the money was a note. "This is just the beginning. Let's talk about your future." Jake called him immediately, his voice trembling with gratitude and lingering doubt. "Mr. Grayson, I can't thank you enough for this," he began. "But why are you doing all of this? You barely know me." "I told you," Mr. Grayson replied calmly. "Your kindness reminded me of what truly matters. And now, I want to help you rebuild. Not just financially, but in every way possible." He invited Jake to meet him again, this time at a quiet cafe downtown. When Jake arrived, Mr. Grayson greeted him warmly, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit. For the first time, Jake noticed something about him. His posture, his composure, the subtle confidence he carried. It hinted at a life far beyond simplicity. As they sat down, Mr. Grayson leaned forward, his tone serious yet gentle. "There's something I need to tell you, Jake," he said. "Something important." Jake's heart skipped a beat. Was he about to admit this had all been some elaborate setup? "I'm not just a retired businessman," Mr. Grayson continued. "My full name is Edward Grayson III. I founded Grayson Industries, a company worth billions. After stepping away from the business world, I dedicated myself to giving back quietly, without fanfare. But meeting you, it changed something in me." Jake stared at him, stunned. The frail man he'd helped at the gas station, the same one now sitting across from him, was a billionaire? "I didn't tell you before because I wanted you to see me as a person, not a title," Mr. Grayson explained. "And I didn't help you because of my wealth. It's because of you. Your compassion inspired me to do more." Jake struggled to process everything. This revelation shifted his understanding of their encounter entirely. He wasn't just helping an elderly man struggling to afford gas. He was unknowingly inspiring someone who could change lives, including his own. "But why me?" Jake asked finally, his voice soft. "You could have chosen anyone else to support." "Because you gave when you had nothing to spare," Mr. Grayson replied passionately. "Most people wait until they're comfortable before helping others, but you acted selflessly, even when it cost you dearly. That's rare, Jake, and it deserves recognition." He paused, studying Jake's reaction carefully. "I don't expect anything in return, but I do have a proposal. Let me fund your dreams, whatever they may be. Whether it's starting a business, going back to school, or simply stabilizing your life, consider it my way of honoring your courage." Tears filled Jake's eyes as his words sank in. Part of him still felt uneasy accepting such generosity, fearing judgment or dependency. Yet another part of him realized this was bigger than him. It was about proving that kindness mattered. "What if," Jake started hesitantly, "what if we used your resources to help others too? To set up programs for families in need, or mentor young people who struggle like I did?" Mr. Grayson's face lit up with pride. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. Together, we'll create opportunities. Not just for you, but for everyone around us." For the first time since losing his job, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about fixing his problems, it was about amplifying his impact. By the end of their conversation, they had sketched out plans for a community initiative aimed at supporting struggling families. Mr. Grayson agreed to fund it, while Jake would lead the project, ensuring it stayed grounded in empathy and authenticity. As they parted ways, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that his small act of kindness had sparked something extraordinary. One decision, to help a stranger, had unraveled a chain reaction neither he nor Mr. Grayson could have predicted. And this was only the beginning. In the months that followed, Jake and Mr. Grayson worked tirelessly to bring their vision to life. They called it Fuel for Families, a nod to the gas station where their paths first crossed. The initiative aimed to support struggling families by providing essentials like food, clothing, and temporary financial assistance. But more than that, it sought to restore hope, to remind people that kindness still existed in the world. Jake threw himself into the project with a passion he hadn't felt in years. He spent his days organizing donations, coordinating volunteers, and meeting with local businesses to secure partnerships. Mr. Grayson handled the logistics, using his connections and resources to ensure everything ran smoothly. Together, they made an unstoppable team. One of their first major efforts was hosting a free community event at a local park. Families who had been quietly suffering, skipping meals or stretching paychecks to make ends meet, were invited to enjoy games, music, and warm meals without judgment. Volunteers served plates piled high with barbecue chicken, cornbread, and fresh salads, while children laughed and played under colorful banners. As Jake moved through the crowd, greeting attendees and sharing stories, he noticed how much lighter everyone seemed. Laughter echoed through the park, replacing the usual weight of worry. For many, this was the first time in months they'd felt seen and valued. Afterward, one woman approached Jake with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "This is the first real meal my kids have had in weeks." Jake hugged her tightly, his own eyes welling up. "You don't have to thank me. Just promise me one thing. When you're able, pay it forward." The woman nodded, clutching Jake's hand before walking away. Moments like these reminded Jake why he'd chosen this path, even when it cost him dearly. But not everyone was supportive. Some friends and neighbors whispered behind his back, accusing him of exploiting Mr. Grayson's wealth for personal gain. Others questioned whether fuel for families was sustainable or even necessary. People will always find reasons to criticize, Mr. Grayson told him one evening as they reviewed plans for future projects. "Don't let them dim your light, Jake. What we're doing here, it matters." His words strengthened Jake's resolve. He knew the work wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Every family helped, every child fed, every parent relieved of stress. It all added up to something greater than any criticism. Meanwhile, Mr. Grayson encouraged Jake to pursue his own dreams alongside the initiative. When Jake mentioned wanting to start a mechanic shop to help unemployed individuals learn trade skills, Mr. Grayson offered to fund the venture. "I can't accept that," Jake protested initially. "I already owe you so much." "You don't owe me anything," Mr. Grayson countered firmly. "This is your chance to grow, to become the leader this community needs. Let me help you get there." Reluctantly, Jake agreed. With Mr. Grayson's support, he opened Grayson and Jake Auto Works, a garage that doubled as a training center for aspiring mechanics. It quickly became a hub of opportunity, offering free classes and apprenticeships to those eager to learn. As years passed, Fuel for Families grew into a beacon of hope for the community. Local media picked up the story, shining a spotlight on Jake's journey from gas station worker to changemaker. People began donating time, money, and resources, inspired by his resilience and Mr. Grayson's generosity. Through it all, Jake never forgot the lesson he'd learned that fateful day at the gas pump. Kindness, no matter how small, could spark change far beyond what he imagined. One evening, as Jake stood outside his thriving auto shop watching young mechanics hard at work, Mr. Grayson joined him, leaning on his cane. "You've changed lives, Jake," he said softly, "and I'm honored to have played a small part in your story." Jake shook his head, smiling. "No, Mr. Grayson, you gave me a chance to change mine, and I'll never forget that." As they stood together in comfortable silence, Jake realized their partnership had become more than just friendship. It was proof that even the most unlikely connections could transform lives, including their own. And so, the ripple of kindness continued, spreading outward and touching hearts across generations. One act of compassion had sparked a legacy, one that would endure long after Jake and Mr. Grayson were gone. If this story warmed your heart, don't forget to share it with friends and family. Let us know in the comments. What's the kindest thing you've ever done or received? Your stories inspire us to keep creating tales that matter,